Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This mega show is about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1, Episode 5 of Class of '09. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, let's start off in the past, where we have the class, they're going to, obviously this is after passing all the firearm stuff, but they all end up on this kind of field trip, where it's like typically they end up going to like the Holocaust Museum, because it's all about this, I think, the FBI agents in class like learning about history, it's like abuse of power and kind of recognizing and trying not to fall into that situation. That's at least how I'm interpreting it. But they were like, yeah, we can't solely use the Holocaust. I guess because it's like, for one, it's such an extreme example, but it's also one example. And I think you want to have a multi-layered perspective on different forms of abuse of power. So they ended up like, they wanted to take a trip to like Martin Luther King Jr.'s memorial, but it's like, hey, it's being built right now, so we're going to his house, where they end up finding Vivian, who is the she's a civil rights lawyer. That's kind of, because for her, it's like, right, she's watched as no matter how much money gets paid out in these civil rights situations, as a civil lawyer in that regard, it's still not enough to change things. So she thinks by working with cops, giving these FBI agents a certain perspective, it can change things kind of from the inside and out. And so, because she talks about like, right, like learning about kind of a dark thing about the FBI, which I never heard this before. It's like, oh yeah, the FBI, tried to get Martin Luther King Jr. to kill himself. It's like, here's even the letter they sent him. I was like, I guess maybe, once again, this is the first time I'd ever heard of that. So maybe it was a thing of, hey, if you don't kill yourself, you're going to make things worse for the black community. All the people who are beside you, all the people who are putting their lives on the line for this. If you don't, like, maybe that's kind of what the contents of that letter was. But the past stuff also coincides with, obviously, the whole thing between Poet and Lennox, and her saying like, right, we don't have to kind of put everything on the front street. Like, yeah, we're dating, and yeah, everyone knows it, but we don't have to kind of just like flaunt it. So like I want to have like a decorum of like professionalism, you know. So it's like, right, the line between professionalism and funny, and which one's harder. And it's like, well, funny is getting harder and harder with each passing day. So obviously, Lennox talks to her later saying that, like, right, the academy only has, like, they're like 20 weeks or whatever, and it's like we're already halfway through. So it's going to be a certain point we're going to have to decide what this is. Is this just a fling, or could this be something more? And it's just like, he's like, I'm going full throttle. You're the one pumping the brakes. We have to figure this out. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit because of the future stuff, because that is always the thing of having all that time. It gives you, hindsight is 2020. And so it is a thing of, right, Poet was the one kind of pumping the brakes, and she was kind of looking for any excuse to kind of get out. I mean, we now know, like, Lennox at the very least has that perspective on things all these years later. So, but all of that, seeing them, I guess, was enough to kind of push Teo to ask Vivian out, because once again, he said at the beginning, like in the past, that he probably didn't see himself ever getting married, which we know he ended up obviously doing that. Does seem like, jumping ahead a little bit, does seem like in 2034 him and Vivian aren't together anymore, because she was like, yeah, we don't live together anymore. So I'm like, either they're separated or they're full-blown divorced at that point in time. But transition, well, because I also appreciate Gabriel, really quickly, staying in the past really quickly about that whole thing. Like, Gabriel was like, no, go ahead, we'll wait for you. And it's like, we probably don't have to include this. But I love Drew was like, no, we kind of have to include everything. Why wouldn't we include this? I don't know if that was supposed to be like an evaluation thing, or just like Gabriel being like, we don't have to include this in the paperwork, because it's not like it's a relationship inside. It's not like the Poet and Lennox thing. It's an outside thing. But she also has her connection to the FBI because she's working alongside them. So maybe that's where they kind of get in the murky territory. Or maybe it's just kind of like, nah, it's kind of a reflection on him that he's taking this time during something that's supposed to be a lesson. He's using this to, ask someone out on a date. So transitioning over to present day, which we're no longer in 2023, we're in 2025. It's been 2 years since the attack at the firing range at the FBI, as well as the building being brought down. And Teo's in front of a lot of people, because it's a conversation of, okay, so is this a person issue or was it a systematic issue? And obviously, the broad strokes answer a systematic thing, but Teo's saying like there's a lot more complexity to it because he's saying that going back to Mark in the first place, he was questioned multiple times, but he was always allocated to the role of he's not someone of interest, he's not important. And it's like, wow, this is the same guy that was planning to attack the FBI, planning to try and come at me and try and kill my wife, which if it wasn't for Teo's preventative measure, his wife would be dead right now. So it is that thing about him talking about that the FBI has worked the way it has for so long, but we can't keep it going like this because the whole point is, hey, we need to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. And Teo's saying like, right, if we make like little like changes here and there, it won't matter because we'll be right back here at some point when another big tragedy happens, asking the same question of what went wrong. And it's like, right, because for Teo, it's not just one person, it's not one side of it. There are so many facets and elements to this because it's like the people on this side of things and this part of the system working the way it does didn't kind of communicate with this. That's why, like, obviously, that's why OR's database is so important. And so we do see that utilized when they have a situation where some people who, like two kids who, like a 19 and 20-year-old who had no priors, were radicalized, and ultimately using the data that they had and an agent checking through the database is like, hey, these like bombs aren't plugged in or whatever, so we can take them out. Took them out, thought they saved the hostage. I was scared. I was on pins and needles. I was like, oh my God, the bombs are just going to blow up, because even OR was like, yeah, this is our guess in the time frame that we've been able to look up stuff and what we know so far. It seems this is a guesstimate at most. Like, there's still some room for error, but luckily, everyone saves. I was like, oh, the bombs are still going to go off. And so, oh no, they didn't. And then people start dropping dead because it turns out the water was poisoned. So I guess the point is like, hey, these people had been like dehydrated, and so we were bringing in bottles of water, so it made them like think like, okay, it's fine, because like the seals weren't broken, but it turns out like, was it arsenic was added, like they used syringes to like stick it in through the caps without popping the seal. So they drank the water, obviously because they were dehydrated, but they saw the water coming in, so I guess this water's fine, and they drunk it. And yeah, because as Teo says, that the people we're dealing with, they knew if they fired a shot, we'd come in, but by handling things the way they did, there's a lot more news coverage, and because these people were radicalized or whatever. And it turns out, looking through the data, like, from the database, looking through it from an agent's eye, taking even more time, because that's also the thing. In a situation like that, you don't have time to make those kind of quick decisions because you're on the clock. So we're talking about like thousands of bits of data, like, because it's all printed out. Like, this is all the data, everything that was in OR's database that they were pulling from, and they looked through it and they found out like they were talking on like, they're gamers, and they were using like a chat message between each other, and it turns out they were referencing like how to kill somebody. But it's like, how do you differentiate? Because like gamers talk and say like foul and wild shit, but how do you determine what's real and what isn't in this regard? Because even OR is like, it's not going to be a foolproof thing. Yes, the database is a beautiful and amazing resource, but once again, it's not meant to replace agents. Agents are meant to be there, to be the ones who take the data that's all gathered and make concise, more informed decisions. But it's not going to be like 100% surefire thing. But from Teo's perspective, it's like the database isn't the issue. It's people are, because people aren't fast enough. People can't immediately make connections because it's too much to go through for even one person, even multiple people. It's too much for them to juggle. And once again, especially in dire circumstances where time is of the essence and stuff. So it's like, how do you deal with that? And that also ties into Teo meeting with Amos, because he has the like ever learning like system or whatever. It just hadn't been combined with I mean, I'd assume like it's still like, hey, the database is there at the heart, and then like the system ended up taking and devouring and learning from that database and becoming what it is in the future. But Teo had met with Amos about like, right, you have one of the only like learning like AIs. There's China has one, Google has one, Facebook has one, and you have one, and you're having it being wasted on like shopping stuff, you know, where it could be used for good. Because Teo tried to present this whole like, we got to change everything before like someone higher up in the FBI, and there was a lawyer there being like, oh, are you pushing this because Orr asked you to? But it's like, no, because Teo believes the system can't stay the way it is. But the guy's like, right, this system is built on the foundational bricks of everything that's come before us, every agent that's come before us. And it's like, we're talking about 100+ years of all of this, and you want to tear that wall down. You know, it's like, because it's like, how do we really, like, because you're asking us to kind of change everything systematically. You're asking us to kind of try for something new rather than something that's been a surefire thing for so long. I mean, not even surefire. It's worked for 100 years, but it's like, even that's not working anymore. So that's why Teo ended up meeting with Amos about this whole thing. And I even love that perspective of him being like, can I be frank with you? Neither one of us should be here right now. The fact of the matter is the system isn't meant to protect people that look like you and me. The fact of the matter is because any misstep, being in the wrong place, life could at any moment, because of the way how systematic this system is, that at any wrong turn, at any moment, our lives could be quite different. We wouldn't be here right now. We barely got here with the way that our lives are. So it's like, the fact is, we need something that will change things for the better. And that's why Teo was reaching out about Amos's system. And so the way he describes it is, whereas with the system, everyone across the country is a suspect. That's how it does. Like, it's like treating crime like an on and off. Rather than having 100% all the facts, what you're going to do is treat everyone as a suspect. You look at them, you examine them, their patterns, their locations, age, gender, and all that. Because this way, like, there's no getting rid of bias. That no matter what you do, there will always be some bias involved, even by the agent that's involved, because they will bring their own personal circumstances, which can be good, which also, it can be insightful, but that can also limit your perspective and view on things. So the system kind of having that non-biased element to it allows it to have the widest perspective possible. That's why it's like, hey, everyone's a suspect. You look through everything. And so it's being a suspect is an on and off switch of, hey, we looked through this data that proves that you are, we're keeping you on the suspect list, or we'll turn you off. Oh, some new data came up to prove that you were. And it's like, it is something that will help at the very least narrow down like, it's not something that can be used to allow an FBI agent to arrest someone, but it can be the groundwork that says like, hey, it gave you the data that gives you a suspect, you arrest them, and then you kind of figure out things from there. But that's also that slippery slope of, once again, it's like, well, you don't have any definitive evidence. You have all these potentially circumstantial things that do link up to kind of set like, hey, this person is kind of a bad person. They're a criminal. They're going to do something, and just based on their patterns and stuff. So it ends up being this interesting and complicated rocky road. You could see Teo was a little bit more about it, but like Vivian had her reservations about it. Because if, especially from Amos's perspective, it's like, this is how, like, there is no getting rid of any like bias or anything, but the only way it's a weird parallel to make, because it's not that you can't equate it, but it's the same principle. But like, once again, a lot of comedy has the perspective of everyone can get these jokes, because if not everyone can be joked about, then nobody can be joked about, type of thing. You know, that's why like South Park is kind of like the greatest example. South Park and like Family Guy would probably be the greatest example. Like, we swing at everyone can get these jokes, because if not everyone's included, then no one can be included, type of situation. That's supposed to be the broad strokes of it. Like I said, it's not the most apt parallel, but I still think there's enough crossover there that you can kind of get what I'm saying. And I think that's what the system applies. That's what the whole, like, everyone can be treated as a suspect, because that's the only way you're going to be playing, like, everyone's going to be playing on an even field, because it's looking at literally everyone the same way. Shifting through data from like the database and like watching these people all the time will allow you to be like, okay, this person's here. Okay, this thing is going down, but they're 1,000 miles away buying bread, so it's fine. We can cross them off the list. So it's interesting to kind of get into the like ins and outs in that regard. I also didn't cover it. I also need to cover present day. Obviously, we had picked up where the last episode had left off with the building coming down on Lennox and Poet. Her eyes like severe. I wasn't expecting like her eye to look that. I had almost expected her eye to like legitimately have like popped out. So it might not even be. I'm like that's why I'm curious. Like, is her eye actually like a real eye, but there's like synthetic elements to it, or is it just a straight up like synthetic like prosthetic eye? Because she still does have her eye post everything. It's just she's blind in it, you know. So I think that's interesting. But like obviously it ends up being kind of like a Obito Kakashi thing of like, yo, I got your eye, like I got a new eye, a special eye, in fact. But I just don't know how much of that's just like enhancements to the eye that was already there, just adding technology to it. My assumption has always been that it's a prosthetic eye that just happens to be highly tech. Because obviously, like even in 2025, she still didn't have it. So somewhere between then and 2034 is when she got it. So she's also working this interstate like murders and stuff with women. Because it's hard to really say, but I think considering everything that happened, to some extent, they've kind of taken a step back, like both her and Lennox, because around the same time, Lennox is going through, his wife is staying with the kid, because later on, we know in 2034, he had talked to Poet about, like, him and his wife had split, and everything, so these were kind of, like, early days of, like, I mean, who knows, like, maybe there was a bigger span of time in between Poet and Lennox being around each other, so there might have been a couple years where they weren't around each other, because that was already happening in 2025, and it's like, oh, in 9 years you talk about the divorce, so maybe they were still trying to work on it, and just, it ultimately didn't work out, or they maybe just Poet and Lennox just weren't around each other at that moment. But what I think is also interesting too, neither one of them, like there's this awkwardness around each other. I mean, at least when they're talking, because it almost makes it seem like they keep in contact, but not to the same extent. They're not around each other because maybe it's too much because of based on what was said, because Lennox was like, I realized it. I've never really told you that I love you. And they were both in a situation where they both thought they were going to die. And I think you add in that neither one of them wants to admit they do remember everything. Lennox was like, yeah, I don't really remember all that was said down there or what happened. And she kind of says the same thing. And both of them are kind of like beating themselves up, I think, about like, right, why can't I admit, like, yes, I remember what was said. I know what I said, So I think a lot of that, plus like the memories of just how complicated their relationships are, where their lives are currently. I mean, at least at the present day of 2025. I think a lot of that played a role and it just complicated their relationship. In 2034, we have but our main crew of the class of 09 together in a makeshift reunion where Poet, Lennox, and Murray were picked up, and Teo comes to meet them somewhere without cameras or without the system being able to kind of fully detect them. And it is a conversation of him, because obviously it's like, right, we're all recognizing how the system has kind of gone beyond, like no one's really in control, even though Teo's trying to say he's in control, because either he legitimately believed he was in control, which that changes by the end of the episode, or maybe because it's spread out. Because the only way he can keep the system going is by letting people believe, like, no, there's still, there's me, there is a checks and balances, that there are me and other agents who are picking up on this stuff. But for Aura, it's like, no, there is no real checks and balances. Because once again, the conversation, they all kind of bring up of the arrest without people really doing it. And is that you're arresting people who might commit crimes based on some data of like, right, based on, okay, these are some previous circumstances of someone with similar data committing a crime, so we're going to apply it to this person, even though this person there's a percentage chance they might commit a crime, or they might go their entire life never committing a crime. It's not, once again, Just like things weren't foolproof before, this isn't foolproof either, but it's a lot more proactive. Whereas, like, once again, it's that thing of a lot of times we're always a step behind, and a lot of times often too late. At least now we can be on top of things so much that, yeah, we might have some bumps along the road. Some innocent people might get arrested for something they didn't do, but we are stopping the next big tragedy around the road. Like, a while in the way, this is how we stop this stuff from happening. And for Teo, it's like, considering all that's going on, we are not going back to the way things were. Like, we are in a way pushing towards building a better system, a better country. Once again, with this country safer than it's ever been. It's one of the safest countries in the world. It's like Teo kind of reports and stuff. So, but he talks about Poet always being the person who wants to try and help people. And it's just kind of like, right, this is your final warning. The system is going to start noticing you, like, and seeing you as a threat. And he's trying to warn them because of their history, because we are class, because we are friends. And it's so sad that you see, because that class ended up getting divided over these years because different things, like, we don't know where Murray really stands with the rest of the class, but we can see the complications as, especially amongst, or Poet and Lennox, the complicated things in their lives and what they've given to the FBI and what is kind of taken from them in turn. Then you also add in like Teo and his guilt about what he failed to see, what was kind of revealed but maybe revealed too late, and just in conjunction with all of that, it's just like it splintered this group so much. Once again, Drew described them as like her best class, which we don't even know if Drew made it present day because we haven't, we focus on 2 years later, so I don't think we heard anything about Drew. Last time we saw her was in 2023 after like the guy shot at all those FBI agents. She was hit pretty bad, like multiple, like two times, so we don't know if she made it or not. But later on, 4 of the class, with the exception of Teo, went to meet with the senator who met with Vivian because it's like, right, she wanted to talk about the system. The thing is, at the end of the day, Vivian trusts Teo with her life despite where their current circumstances are. But it's like, no, Teo's not the one I'm questioning. It's this system. Like, I'm not questioning who's really in charge. And I think even Vivian had those questions all those years ago in present day 2025. And I think for that to kind of come back now and to see like, yeah, things have probably swung out from underneath Teo's control to the point that meeting with the senator, it wasn't even like FBI agents showed up. It was just kind of like the system's drones did. So were hid by the priest along with the senator, and those things bust in there, and they saw the priest as a threat, because it's like, right, are you seeing him as a threat because he's working with the senator who's going to try and take this all down, so you're reading him as a threat that way? But then again, it's like, once again, everyone's seen as a threat. It's more so like, right, it's not even once again, the whole conversation of, I forgot the exact phrasing, I'd forgotten that the phrasing was, instead of like innocent until proven guilty, it's like everyone's guilty until proven innocent and narrowing down the suspect list. So this guy was seen as a threat, but it's like, well, it also plays into, well, he would be kind of a threat because he picked up something to threaten him, be like, hey, get out of here. This is the house of God. You kind of have no business being here. And he gets tased. And you're like, and for Teo, he tried to stop it every second of that situation, but him nor anyone else couldn't stop it. And for him, it's like, why couldn't I stop it? And it's just, I think for the first time, he has to finally admit this is going beyond his control, and his attempt to make a better world, a utopia. It's never like that perfect. Like, there's never going to be anything perfect. There's never going to be a utopia because there's always going to be it can never be sustained. There is no such thing as like perfect, because the world is sadly and also beautifully, perfectly imperfect, so. But once again, we understand where Teo's coming from and just how lost he got on this misguided road, because he had the best of intentions, but it is something where you kind of got lost along the way, even to the point Amos was like, yo, this isn't what it isn't what we thought. It grew well beyond what we were expecting, and it's beyond our control, and what the system has turned into and what it's doing now, we can't let it continue doing that, so. it's definitely going to be interesting to see ultimately where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. I'm curious, like, are any of these agents going to die? Like, this might be a thing of, like, we might have to die along the way to stop all this, so not all of them might not survive. I could definitely see, like, a Teo sacrificing himself because he's the one that really pushed it to this point, but maybe it's also poetic for him to live with the mistake that he made. Like, I'm curious to see how that ultimately ends up shaking out, so we'll see. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.